Rob, it sounds like you all are trading off among yourselves during the presentation. So
we have the honor of doing the only non-hard science presentation.
No, don't call it hard science. Natural science, social science. There you go.
And there are 5 authors for this presentation, but 3 of us drew the short straw, so we're going to do today. So what we'll be talking about today are some tools for landscape history. We'll tell you a little bit about the Cienega History Project, then talk about some general research resources, go a little more in depth on 2 specific research resources that you might be interested in, and then show you some preliminary results of the cultural landscape history research that we produced. The Cienega History Project really was formalized in 2016, and it sort of began because we were doing a variety of collaborative projects that involved various organizations, and we thought it would be good to formalize ourselves and work towards the future. So the first project was that the Bureau of Land Management, the University of Arizona, and the Empire Ranch Foundation worked together on a American landscape history of the Empire Ranch. I used the wrong phrase, but Robin can correct me. But what we're trying to do in the history project is address specific questions and broad themes. You see some examples here, and provide a baseline for future landscape analysis. An example research question that we've had for the Empire Ranch Foundation and the BLM really is, how many acres comprise the Empire Ranch? And there are wildly different estimates in the literature. There's a master's thesis from the U of A that talks about several 100,000 acres, whereas an off-the-cuff remark in an oral history says a little over 1.5 million acres. So we've been trying to approach this and document it. Now, what are the resources that we can use to do this type of research? Fortunately, due to the Homestead Act and its successors, there's a great deal of data, and the BLM actually makes a lot of it available to us online through the General Land Office records. It's a website. You can search by name, you can search by state, by location, and included in this database is Theodore White's 1874 surveys, which Robin will talk a little bit more about. Eventually, to really go in depth, you do need to get the records, which are at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Maps of the Cienega Valley are wonderful resources. I've listed just 2 that are used quite a bit. Actually, the first one, the Riker map, which you see here, is one that BLM had it, and we don't know where they got it from, and we haven't found it any other place. Special collections, both at the University of Arizona, the Arizona Historical Society, can have a great deal of material on specific ranches or specific organizations in the valley. We're fortunate that there's a very good Empire Ranch collection, which, for example, has abstracts of land owned by the Empire Ranch or by the Vail family at the time of Walter Vail's death, so we can specifically document ownership using that. There are things like ledgers, maps, and then at the Arizona Historical Society, again, maps, another Vail collection, and their biography files. Other types of resources available include things like oral histories. The Empire Ranch Foundation maintains archives, which include things like BLM reports that were done when BLM first became responsible for the ranch, Vail family correspondence, and photographs, and you'll see examples of how those can be used in this research. And then other published material which you may be familiar with, like theses and dissertations, And my favorite and most addictive database these days is a free database from the Library of Congress, Chronicling America, which has digitized images of newspapers, the smaller newspapers in the area, from the 1870s up until like 1914. And you can go in there, 24, and you can do keyword searches, and you can spend all day on it. I'm now going to
Well, I'm standing in for Bill Gillespie, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. So bear with me as I try to explain what Bill's area of interest is. And he's fascinated by this individual, Theodore White, who was an early surveyor in this particular area, and he was really probably one of the first people to do detailed survey in southeast Arizona, and most of the original surveys are from Theodore White. He specifically in 1874, he surveyed 7 different township and ranges in the space of 3 months. And that means he with his team was covering 250 square miles, 500 linear miles within a space of 3 months. And as he did that, he was recording all of the cultural and natural resources within and along those lines, and making markers. They must have been doing it at a full run, but God knows how they got all of that done in one short period of time. So what's interesting about this 1874 period is this was shortly after the establishment of the Chiricahua Indian Reservation, and as a function of that, safety was significantly improved, or the conflicts were lessened, if you want to be PC about it. During this period of time, the number of individuals who were coming into Santa Cruz, the San Pedro, Cienega area, the Sulphur Springs Valley were going up exponentially. The Vail family was one of those, and Sanford family, we'll talk about in a minute, was another one. But to go back to Theodore White's surveys, which are available online, and if you spend some time looking at these images, they will tell you an awful lot about what this landscape looked like 150 years ago. And there's very interesting information. So for example, here on the Cienega, at the lower portion, we're looking at what was the original Cienega station. This was a station on the Jackass and the Butterfield stage route. It's sitting, as you can see, right on the creek. It identifies 2 separate structures. It gives you actual visualization of what the foundations of those structures look like, and probably pretty close to their size. It's telling you that it was right sitting on a very marshy area. It identifies the roads as they were coming through that area. So this is valuable information, not just for boring historians, but for other people as well. Okay, what else do you want me to say? Okay, next one, Sanford Ranch.
You did it twice.
Sorry, back. Thank you. Sanford Ranch, which is, if you're unfamiliar with it, was the major competitor to the Vail family Empire Ranch. It's further down creek in the Cienega. As you can see, What's valuable about this image is that Theodore White is identifying the location of the ranch buildings. He's identifying the number of ranch buildings, their size relative to the creek itself, identifying a road which goes by in the near area. I've seen a number of archaeological surveys which only identify one building, but there are clearly more than that. So this is why you need to go back to the original sources. What else am I supposed to say? The other important thing about these documents is the verbal description that goes along with them. So here, Theodore is walking this line up here, up and back. He's walking this line here and up and back. He's recording where along that line he intercepts the Cienega Creek. So he's intercepting here, he's intercepting here, and he marks these individual corners, called quarter corners, within each of these sections, being 640 acres. And so what we can look at is actually, here is his mark for the Cienega Creek, and Bill has carefully put in the present location of the Cienega Creek. So we're looking at changes in the patterns of the flow over time. The other point that is important to note is that each time he crosses, makes a quarter corner boundary marker, he has to identify the location of that boundary marker using other elements in the landscape. And there wasn't a whole lot of other buildings other than Sanford's Ranch at the time. And one of the things he does is to identify significant trees in that landscape. And so in his notes, which Bill has added down here, he's talking about a particular mesquite of 24 and 36-inch diameters, and the distance away from that quarter corner. So a month ago we could have maybe found that tree, but it's still present today. But that's one of the things we need to go out and find on June 8th. Okay, next. Just looking at the Empire Ranch itself, which is originally owned by E.N. Fish, a major supplier in Tucson. So Theodore White identifies it right on the intersection of three roads. Fort Crittenden was off the bottom of the map and had just been closed. Here's the road leading to Sanford's Ranch, which is kind of off the edge. The other important point is that he identifies water sources. So this one, let's see, this one simply says arroyo coming in right here. This one says water hole. Another very interesting point. We think that this may be the Empire Spring, but that's not really identified. What else am I saying about this one? Oh my God, okay. We'll move on, because I don't want to. Here's another one. Yes, and here's talking about trees in the location. Essentially, there were two trees that he could identify as quarter corner points around the Empire Ranch. This is a photograph taken probably 6 to 8 years later, and that's the Empire Ranch right there. This is the Empire Gulch coming down through here and then winding backwards that way. There wasn't a whole lot at that time. So the photograph and Theodore White's notes merge and tell us more about this particular landscape in time. One more thing is to note is that in later surveys, there gets to be a lot more information. We get pasture lines, we get irrigation lines. We get distinct information about who's living where, and detailed information about roads, and all sorts of other interesting things. And I'm turning it over to Dave, who really gets to tell you about the good stuff.
Your section.
Your huh?
Your section.
Oh, my section. Oh, God. Homesteading was the primary way of transferring land from the public domain to the private realm. And it was an imperfect system. There were legislatively many different ways of doing that, it required a significant investment by each individual who made a homestead claim. It would take first a survey, as Theodore White did. It would require that you were a citizen or filing for citizenship, which was a major draw for people coming from outside this country, Mexico, Europe, whatever. It took a long time. It took 3 to 5 years of residency. You had to build and document that you've made improvements on the land, house, wells, fences, and you had to show successful agriculture. And for the East Coast people, that was really easy. For those in the West, it was an impossibility. And I put this here just to show that not everybody adhered to the rules. You could claim you built a 12 by 14-foot house, and that's the size of your 12 by 14-foot house. But fraud was a problem, but not a major problem. It was also not free. Don't let anybody tell you about that. The records that go along with this homesteading are phenomenal. If you go to the National Archives or have somebody do it for you, they will tell you in incredible detail what life was like during that period of time. Just to go quickly, Walter Vail, next to his original homestead, applied for a desert land entry, which was to manipulate water and use it for agricultural purposes. He had to draw a map, and here is a photograph documenting the grain fields and the orchards that he put in. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and go ahead, run.
A few extra minutes on that one. But yes.
Go ahead. Sorry. Oh, you want that thing?
Yes, I want.
Sorry.
This map is actually the last of Robin's map indicating the property of Vail that's involved here. I want to give you a few examples of the application of the tools and resources that we've been discussing here applied to specific features of the historic Cienega Empire Ranch landscape, augmented by field investigation and GIS. The center of the Empire Ranch landscape, of course, is the headquarters itself, and its architectural history has been worked out previously by other researchers some years ago, but we're adding on with recent additional research involving, among other things, structures that are no longer there. So this, for example, this bunkhouse was constructed about 1890 and burned in the early 1900s. We can see it in historic photographs and get a general location from that, but there's actually archaeological evidence on the ground of its location, shown by that red square, and of course subject to future excavation. He said it would help. Corrals that are no longer, these are the early mesquite corrals, mesquite fences, and they appear in a lot of historic photographs, and we can triangulate the general location. But by using historic aerial photographs, we can actually see vegetation pattern for where these corrals existed, and so can identify them by that way, as also with the possibility of future archaeological excavation. That's right around the ranch itself. With the current landscape orientation, research is expanding from that headquarters core to look at the details of the decades of activity that spread across the entire rangelands. Water management, pastures, roads, cultivated field areas, range corrals, and so on. So it's a huge area to be concerned about in terms of what actually is on the land, represented today as archaeological historic domains. And the maps on these two posters over on the side, by the way, give you a good idea of what this huge expanse of the empire was. So right now, with our research, GIS is a primary tool, of course, for landscape research, and we are indebted, I have to say, to BLM, Nature Conservancy, and Desert Botanical for sharing georeference files with us. And we're building on those with historic maps and whatnot. But this provides information for targeted archaeological field investigations to actually see what remains on the land from all of the historic ranch activity. And that things on the land include roads, and so we've digitized from the historic maps the long history of road development out here. Some of these are now, or many of these are now abandoned, but leave archaeological remains. And of course, others, by doing this work, we can determine which of the current roads are actually historic roads as well. Other things that we can look at is the homestead boundaries that Robin was referring to, looking for corner posts that White and others may have left, looking for fence lines as boundary areas. And also, then there are specific features on early historic maps that we can also use as targets for archaeological investigation, including the White maps, one of which is indicates a structure called House at Hay Camp, which is, for reasons I won't go into now, is a very important feature, and the potential for identifying its location is certainly great. So this is just an example of using maps. So while archival sources provide guides for field survey, there's obviously lots of historic ranch features that don't appear on these early maps. And so reconstructing the past cultural landscape necessitates a systematic survey. So there's a potential for a substantial material record for the ranching landscape, such as abandoned wells, corrals, fences, habitation sites, and so on. Now, some of these have been identified in the Section 106 surveys that have been referred to, but there's still many areas that remain unsurveyed and still a potential for a great deal. An obvious point, but one worth emphasizing, is the cultural and natural landscape research are complementary. That 1880s photograph that Robin showed you a moment ago of the ranch with the very shallow stream bed of the empire, with this recent photo shows a useless fence line that well illustrates the subsequent drastic downcutting of the empire itself. A few minutes ago, Robin referred to the late 1800s veil acquisition of the empire stream and the streams to the east of it, of the homestead, and this provides a good example of doing research to identify, bringing all these resources together to identify specific features of the landscape, and with particular focus on the cultivation areas and the reservoirs that Vail indicated that he was built or was going to build. And with a little bit of gerrymandering of his map, we can actually place it over the current landscape to identify the existing, the remnants of his developed features, including tanks that represent the canals that he was planning to build. I'm sorry, represent the reservoirs that he was planning to build. A 1936 aerial over on the left demonstrates that those existing tanks that we see today were present in that year. And in other words, these are not modern, the tank photographs at the bottom. And then also we can identify that same tank, we're quite sure, from a photograph from 1900. So this is the earliest known surface water management on the ranch, and notably it was carried out during one of the worst droughts of that particular period. Yeah, I want to end on a personal statement. All of this is really more than research and historic preservation and Section 106. This is about, to me, it's about sense of place. And there's always history under our feet. And knowing that history makes sense of place, means that sense of place can be made manifest throughout the entire Cienega Watershed. So we've seen lots of discussion of the natural landscape, but this is simply a thought to take sense of place as a concept by which you can appreciate the historic landscape that you're walking through all the time out here as well. Thank you.
Okay. So we need to segue to our break. I want to emphasize